London, April 1816. The wax candle chandeliers of the Duchess of Richmond's ballroom cast dancing shadows across marble floors so polished they reflected the glittering assembly like a mirror held to society's self-importance. Charlotte Vivienne Fairmont stood near the terrace doors, her gloved hand resting lightly on the cool stone column, and wondered not for the first time that evening why she continued subjecting herself to these ritualized displays of matrimonial commerce. At 22, Charlotte knew precisely what society thought of her. The whispers dogged her steps like an unwelcome shadow for 2 years now. Poor Charlotte Fairmont. Such intelligence wasted on wanting in fashionable prettiness. And after that dreadful business with young Mountjoy, well, one cannot blame her for becoming so profoundly cynical. She had learned through bitter experience to armor herself with indifference, to shield herself with sharp wit, and arm herself with cool composure her defense. The answer to her unspoken question stood across the crowded ballroom in eau de Nil silk and emeralds worth more than the Fairmont townhouse. Miss Lydia Winthrop, now Lady Mountjoy, who had arrived in London 2 springs ago with £40,000 and the subtlety of an invading army. The woman who had stolen Charlotte's tenderly held dreams with nothing more than an impressive dowry and insipid appeal. If stories of love that defy society's cruelest judgments move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. Charlotte adjusted her spectacles with practiced nonchalance, a gesture she had perfected to signal both intellectual authority and complete disinterest in the marriage market's machinations. Her gown of deep plum silk was elegant but subdued, chosen deliberately to fade into the periphery of ballroom politics. She had become expert at invisibility. "Miss Fairmont," a familiar voice interrupted her studied observation, "how delightful to see you here, still gracing these events with your presence." Charlotte's spine stiffened imperceptibly before she turned to face the speaker. Lady Sophronia Blackwell regarded her with the particular smile of a woman who thrived on others' discomfort, her fan moving in languid arcs that sent her perfume wafting across the space between them. "Lady Sophronia," Charlotte replied with perfect courtesy. "The Duchess's gatherings are always so diverting, one never knows what entertainment the evening might provide." "Indeed," Lady Sophronia's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "Though I confess I am surprised to see you remain so devoted to the season's activities. Most young ladies in your particular circumstances might have, shall we say, redirected their energies elsewhere by now." The implication hung between them like smoke. Women without prospects became governesses, companions, permanent residents in the homes of more fortunate relatives. Women who had been publicly rejected by promising suitors learned to accept invisibility as kindness. "I find intellectual stimulation wherever it may be found," Charlotte said smoothly. "Even ballrooms occasionally provide it, though admittedly one must search diligently." Lady Sophronia's smile tightened fractionally. Before she could respond, however, a subtle hush fell over the assembled company. Charlotte felt it before she saw its source, the collective turning of heads, the subtle shift in conversation's tenor. Benedict Lawrence Kingsley, Marquess of Stratford, had entered the ballroom. Charlotte had seen the Marquess before, naturally. One could hardly move through London society without encountering the man whose fortune was whispered to exceed that of several smaller European principalities. But she had never stood in proximity close enough to observe the details that now struck her with unexpected force. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet and 2 inches, with shoulders that spoke of physical pursuits beyond the fashionable idleness of his class. His evening attire was immaculate but severe, black superfine coat cut with mathematical precision, white cravat arranged with elegant simplicity that suggested a man who had no need for elaborate peacocking. His face was angular, all sharp planes and decisive lines, with grey eyes that swept the assembly with the cold assessment of a general surveying a battlefield. Those eyes lingered on Charlotte for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Then, impossibly, he began moving in her direction with deliberate purpose. Lady Sophronia drew a sharp breath. "Surely he cannot be approaching us," she whispered with barely contained excitement. "The Marquess never dances, never socializes beyond strict necessity. It is said he considers ballrooms a waste of resources." Charlotte said nothing, her heart beginning to beat with uncomfortable intensity as the most powerful man in England closed the distance between them with assured deliberation. He stopped directly before her. Lady Sophronia seemed to have temporarily forgotten how to breathe. "Miss Charlotte Fairmont," he said, his voice a measured baritone that carried no warmth but perfect clarity. "I would speak with you. Privately, if you would permit." The ballroom had gone entirely silent in the space directly around them. Charlotte could feel dozens of eyes fixed upon her back, hear the beginning whispers already starting their inevitable circuit. "Lord Stratford," she managed, proud that her voice remained steady, a touch of challenge in her steady tone. "I am not certain that would be proper without chaperonage." "Your father, Baron Fairmont, is present," he replied without inflection. "I have already secured his permission for this conversation. If you would accompany me to the library, we shall leave the door appropriately ajar and position ourselves in clear view of the corridor. Your character shall suffer no detriment." It was not a request. It was a clear statement of necessary order, delivered with the absolute confidence of a man accustomed to having his organizational decisions accepted without question. Charlotte glanced at Lady Sophronia, whose expression had cycled through shock, envy, and now barely suppressed fury. Something rebellious stirred in Charlotte's chest, something that had been sleeping since Philip Mountjoy had shattered her foolish heart 2 years prior. "Very well," she said, her hand decisively setting her untouched crystal glass aside. "Lead the way, my lord." The walk through the ballroom felt interminable. Charlotte kept her gaze forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares that followed their progress like searchlights. The Marquess moved with mechanical efficiency, neither hurrying nor dawdling, his bearing suggesting this was merely another item on an extensive list of tasks requiring execution. The library was mercifully empty, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes that gleamed in the light of scattered candles. True to his word, the Marquess positioned them near the open doorway where passing servants could observe their interaction, though the angle prevented easy eavesdropping. "Miss Fairmont," he began without preamble, "I have conducted extensive research into your circumstances, character and intellectual capabilities. You are 22 years of age, unmarried, daughter of Baron Fairmont, whose financial difficulties are substantial, though not yet publicly acknowledged. You read Latin and Greek, correspond with several notable scholars under a masculine pseudonym, and possess mathematical aptitude unusual in either sex. 2 years ago, you were courted by Lord Philip Mountjoy, who subsequently broke the attachment in favor of Miss Winthrop's superior dowry. You have since cultivated a reputation for cynicism that I suspect is partly genuine and partly defensive posturing." Charlotte's face burned with humiliation at having her private disasters catalogued with such clinical precision. She opened her mouth to deliver a cutting dismissal, but he continued without pause. "I require a wife," he stated flatly, "not for romantic purposes, but for practical necessity. My mother is deceased, my sisters are married and managing their own households, and I find myself in need of a capable woman to manage social obligations that interfere with more productive use of my time. Additionally, societal pressure regarding my unmarried state has become tedious." He paused, grey eyes fixing on her with uncomfortable intensity. "I do not want a wife who will bore me with vapid conversation or expect romantic declarations I have no intention of providing. I do not want a wife who will interfere with my business interests or demand emotional attention I consider inefficient allocation of resources. I want a wife who understands that marriage is a practical arrangement providing mutual benefit, nothing more." Charlotte found her voice at last, though it emerged colder than she intended. "And you believe I am such a woman? How flattering, Lord Stratford. You paint me as the perfect candidate for loveless matrimony." "I paint you as intelligent enough to recognize opportunity when presented," he corrected without emotion. "Your father's debts will be cleared. Your mother and sisters will be provided for. You will have access to resources that will allow you to pursue intellectual interests without restriction. In exchange, you will manage my household, serve as hostess for necessary entertainments, and provide the appearance of domestic propriety that society demands." He tilted his head fractionally, studying her reaction. "I am not offering romance, Miss Fairmont. I am offering security, respect for your intelligence, and freedom from financial anxiety. If you accept, we shall marry by special license within 3 days. I see no purpose in extended courtship when both parties understand the terms of the arrangement. Charlotte's intellect engaged through the implications with the same analytical speed that had made her scholarly correspondence so valued. Her father's debts were indeed crushing, an immediate existential threat to her entire family's survival. Her two younger sisters needed dowries if they were to have any chance at properly established marriages. Her mother's health declined under the stress of poverty's encroachment, and Charlotte herself had long since abandoned foolish dreams of love. Philip Mountjoy had cured her of that delusion with brutal efficiency. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "There are dozens of women who would accept such an arrangement. Why choose the one with a damaged reputation?" "Your reputation is irrelevant to my purposes," he replied with the same mechanical precision. "What matters is that you possess the sharp intellect to manage complex social situations, the cynicism to accept a practical arrangement without harboring secret hopes of transformation, and the pride to maintain appropriate dignity as Marchioness of Stratford. You will not discredit my name, Miss Fairmont, and I suspect that marrying the wealthiest man in England will provide certain satisfactions regarding those who previously dismissed your value. To secure a position above those who whispered about her held undeniable appeal." He was right, Charlotte realized with crystalline clarity. Walking into every ballroom as Marchioness of Stratford, possessing rank and power beyond any woman who had whispered about her, watching Philip Mountjoy's face when he realized what she had become, the prospect held undeniable appeal. "I accept," she said, before courage could fail her. 3 days, you said." For the first time, something that might have been approval flickered across his austere features. 3 days, he confirmed. "I shall call upon your father tomorrow morning to finalize arrangements. You need not develop tender feelings, Miss Fairmont. Simply be capable, and we shall deal together admirably." As he escorted her back to the ballroom, Charlotte felt as though she were watching herself from a great distance. She had just agreed to marry a man who viewed her as one might view a particularly useful piece of machinery, yet somehow, after 2 years of hollow grief and bitter isolation, the cold clarity of his proposal felt almost like relief. At least, there would be no false promises this time, no declarations of admiration that would curdle into expedient betrayal, just honest transaction between two people who understood exactly what they were purchasing. The wedding took place 3 days later, in the drawing room of the Fairmont townhouse in Bloomsbury, with only immediate family present and a bishop procured through the Marquess's extensive influence. Charlotte wore a gown of ivory silk that her mother had frantically altered from an older dress, her hands steady as she repeated vows that felt more like business contract than sacred promise. Benedict Lawrence Kingsley slid a ring onto her finger, its single diamond so large it seemed almost vulgar, and kissed her forehead with the impersonal efficiency of a clerk stamping documents. Then it was done. She was Charlotte Vivian Kingsley, Marchioness of Stratford, wife to the wealthiest and most feared man in England. Their wedding breakfast was a subdued affair. The Marquess, Benedict, she must learn to think of him as Benedict, spent most of the meal discussing financial arrangements with her father, issuing drafts that would clear the Baron's debts and provide comfortable income for Charlotte's family. He spoke to her mother with distant courtesy, assured her sisters they would receive dowries of £5,000 each, and generally conducted himself like a philanthropist, dispensing benevolence, rather than a man celebrating his marriage. When the breakfast concluded, he escorted Charlotte to his carriage, a sumptuous vehicle bearing the Stratford arms, and they departed for his townhouse in Grosvenor Square. The house was magnificent, all classical proportions and expensive restraint. A small army of servants materialized to greet them, the housekeeper, Mrs. Daventry, angular and efficient, explaining the household organization with military precision. Benedict listened to ensure nothing had been neglected, then turned to Charlotte. "Mrs. Daventry will show you to your chambers," he said formally. "The Marchioness's suite has been prepared. You will find your belongings have already been transferred and unpacked. Tomorrow morning we shall review the household accounts and social calendar. For this evening, I suggest you rest. The past days have doubtless been taxing." He bowed, perfectly correct, and withdrew to his own quarters without another word. Charlotte followed Mrs. Daventry up the sweeping staircase, through corridors hung with portraits of stern-faced Kingsley ancestors, to a suite of rooms so luxurious they took her breath away. The bedchamber alone was larger than the entire first floor of the Fairmont townhouse, with windows overlooking a private garden and furnishings that spoke of wealth so vast it rendered normal concepts of expense meaningless. A connecting door led to an adjoining chamber, presumably Benedict's rooms. Charlotte noted the heavy lock on her side of the door with mingled relief and something that might have been disappointment. It was a testament to Benedict's scrupulous adherence to the letter of their contract, a formality which felt excessively correct. Not that she wanted marital intimacy with a man who had married her for managerial efficacy. Of course not. She dismissed the hovering lady's maid, another new servant, trained and efficient, and attended to her toilet automatically, still wearing her wedding finery. Outside, London moved through its evening rhythms. Inside, Charlotte contemplated the spectacular strangeness of her new existence. She was married. She was wealthy beyond previous imagination. She was Marchioness of Stratford, and she had never felt more alone in her entire life. The week that followed established patterns that would characterize their marriage. Benedict rose at 6 each morning and departed for his study, where he managed his extensive business interests through correspondence and meetings with various agents and advisors. Charlotte breakfasted alone, then spent mornings with Mrs. Daventry learning the intricate machinery of managing a grand household. The Stratford townhouse operated with mechanical precision that reflected its master's temperament. Every servant knew their duties exactly. Every expense was tracked with mathematical accuracy. Every social obligation was catalogued in leather-bound ledgers that Benedict reviewed with the same attention he applied to shipping manifests and railway investments. They took luncheon together in the smaller dining room, conversations limited to household matters and upcoming social engagements. Benedict inquired about her comfort, ensured she had everything necessary, and treated her with the same distant courtesy one might extend to a valued secretary. Yet Charlotte began noticing small things that did not quite fit the picture of complete emotional detachment he projected. On the third day of their marriage, she found a stack of books in the library with a note in his angular handwriting. "Thought these might interest you." They were recent publications on mathematics and natural philosophy, precisely the subjects that most engaged her intellectual curiosity. On the 5th day, when she mentioned in passing that she found the Marchioness's sitting room too dark for comfortable reading, he had additional lamps and better-positioned furniture delivered by that afternoon. On the 6th day, during one of their business-like luncheons, he asked her opinion on a proposed railway investment. When she pointed out a potential flaw in the projections, he listened with genuine attention and subsequently declined the opportunity, later telling her that her analysis had saved him approximately £15,000. "You have excellent instincts for pattern recognition," he said, something like approval warming his usual cold tone. "I should like to consult you on future investments if you would not find it tedious." Charlotte assured him she would not. In truth, she found these glimpses of intellectual partnership oddly satisfying. Perhaps this marriage would not be entirely devoid of stimulation after all. Their first public appearance as a married couple was scheduled for the Duchess of Richmond's spring ball, exactly 1 week after their wedding. Charlotte dressed with unusual care, selecting a gown of deep sapphire silk that transformed her usually unremarkable coloring into something approaching elegance. Her new lady's maid, Marjorie, dressed her hair in an elaborate arrangement that suited her far better than the simple styles she had worn before. Benedict entered her chambers as she finished her preparations, having knocked and waited for permission in his scrupulously correct manner. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You look well," he said finally. "The jewels." It was a rare instance of admiration from a man who valued precision above appearance. Charlotte blinked in confusion until he produced a leather case from his coat pocket. Inside lay a sapphire and diamond set that must have cost a fortune even by Stratford standards. Necklace, earrings, and bracelet that caught the lamplight with cold fire. "These were my grandmother's," he explained, his voice carefully neutral. "The Marchioness of Stratford traditionally wears them. They suit your coloring." He fastened the necklace himself, his fingers surprisingly soft against her skin, contradicting his rigid control. Charlotte watched in the mirror as the sapphires settled against her throat, transforming her from Charlotte Fairmont into someone who might plausibly be the Marchioness of Stratford. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Practical necessity," he replied, stepping back. "A Marchioness must look the part. Shall we depart?" The carriage ride to the Duchess's residence was silent but not uncomfortable. Charlotte found herself studying her husband's profile in the dim light filtering through the windows. His face was all sharp angles and austere planes, handsome in a severe way that suggested neither softness nor mercy. Yet the way he had fastened those jewels, the care he had taken not to pull her hair, there had been something gentle in the gesture that contradicted his usual mechanical efficiency. Perhaps, Charlotte thought, there were depths to Benedict Lawrence Kingsley that he preferred to keep hidden. Perhaps his cold pragmatism was itself a form of armor, protection against vulnerabilities he refused to acknowledge. Or perhaps she was projecting foolish hopes onto a man who had been perfectly clear about his emotional limitations. Charlotte forcibly reminded herself that she had accepted this marriage with open eyes, that expecting more than practical partnership was the path to disappointment. The Duchess of Richmond's ballroom blazed with light and life, every surface gleaming with the concentrated wealth and power of the ton. Charlotte felt her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety as their arrival was announced, but Benedict's hand settled at her elbow with surprising steadiness. "Remember," he murmured so quietly only she could hear, "you outrank every woman in this room save the Duchesses. They will either defer to you or reveal themselves as fools. Either outcome serves our purposes." It was not romantic reassurance, but it was oddly effective. Charlotte lifted her chin and moved forward into the glittering assembly, with the bearing of a woman who belonged precisely where she stood. The reaction was immediate and gratifying. Women who had ignored her for 2 years suddenly materialized with eager smiles and congratulations. Men who had never bothered to request dances now sought introduction to the Marchioness of Stratford. Lady Sophronia Blackwell executed a curtsy so deep it bordered on theatrical, her expression oscillating between envy and desperate calculation. Benedict remained at Charlotte's side throughout the initial onslaught of attention, deflecting the most intrusive inquiries with frigid courtesy that sent ambitious mothers and curious gossips retreating in confusion. He introduced her to the Duchess, who received Charlotte with genuine warmth and a knowing glint that suggested she understood more than she revealed. "Lady Stratford," the Duchess said, taking Charlotte's hands in hers. "How delightful that Benedict has finally done the sensible thing and secured himself a wife of substance. I have always maintained that intelligence in a woman is vastly more valuable than insipid prettiness. You shall do admirably." Charlotte found herself warming to the older woman despite her usual wariness of aristocratic condescension. There was something genuine in the Duchess's manner that suggested real approval rather than empty politeness. "Your Grace is too kind," Charlotte replied. "Your Grace is accurate," Benedict corrected with the faintest trace of humor. "The Duchess rarely dispenses unearned compliments. Accept the praise, Charlotte. It is well merited." The use of her given name rather than formal address sent unexpected warmth through Charlotte's chest. She glanced at him in surprise, but his expression had already returned to its usual austere neutrality. The evening progressed with Charlotte navigating her new status with increasing confidence. She danced twice with Benedict. His skill surprised her, as did the way his hand at her waist felt both perfectly proper and somehow more intimate than strictly necessary. They moved through the figures with synchronized precision that matched their practical partnership. Yet Charlotte found herself disturbingly aware of his proximity, the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth of his palm through her glove. She was retrieving punch from the refreshment room, accompanied by Marjorie in proper chaperone capacity, when a familiar voice made her spine stiffen with involuntary tension. "Lady Charlotte," the voice said with poorly concealed mockery, "still frequenting these events, I see. How persistent of you." Charlotte turned slowly to face Lord Philip Mountjoy, the man who had shattered her foolish heart 2 years prior and taught her the bitter lesson that romantic declarations meant nothing when balanced against £40,000 and a prettier face. He looked older than she remembered, dissipation beginning to show in the puffiness around his eyes and the slight thickening of his waistline. His cravat was tied with less precision than fashion demanded, and his evening coat showed signs of economy in its cut. Behind him stood his wife, the former Miss Lydia Winthrop, dripping with jewels, but wearing an expression of such vapid boredom it was almost impressive in its completeness. "Lord Mountjoy," Charlotte replied with cool courtesy that betrayed none of her inner turmoil. "I trust you are well." "Well enough," he said with the particular smile of a man who believed himself clever. "Though I confess surprised to see you here. Most ladies of your age and, shall we say, circumstances might have redirected their energies elsewhere by now. The marriage market can be so unkind to those who linger past their prime." The cruelty was deliberate, designed to remind her of her public humiliation at his hands. Charlotte felt her face heat with anger and shame, even as she struggled to maintain composure. "Still unwed, then?" Philip continued, warming to his theme with the obliviousness of a man accustomed to his own wit. "What a pity. I suppose with your situation, your limited prospects, and your advancing years, it becomes progressively difficult to secure suitable establishment. Of course, you were always rather too bookish for most gentlemen's taste. Men generally prefer wives who—" "Lord Mountjoy," a cold voice interrupted from directly behind Charlotte, a voice that cut through Philip's monologue like a blade through silk. "Are you addressing my wife?" Charlotte felt Benedict's hand settle at her waist with unmistakable possession, the warmth of his body radiating against her back. She turned her head slightly and found him standing so close that propriety was stretched to its limits, his grey eyes fixed on Philip with an expression of such concentrated disdain that the younger man actually took a physical step backward. Your wife," Philip stammered, his face cycling through shock, disbelief and dawning horror in rapid succession. "Lady Charlotte you are married to—" "The Marchioness of Stratford," Benedict corrected with frigid precision, each word enunciated with the clarity of a judge pronouncing sentence. "My wife, Lady Stratford, whom you appear to be addressing with remarkable familiarity, given that I do not recall granting you permission for such liberty." The ballroom had gone silent around them. Charlotte could feel dozens of eyes burning into her back, could hear the sudden cessation of conversation as society's most powerful predators scented blood in the water. Philip's wife, Lady Mountjoy, had gone pale beneath her rouge. Clearly she understood the implications even if her husband remained too shocked for proper comprehension. I had no idea," Philip managed, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "I merely was inquiring after Lady Stratford's welfare. Old acquaintance, you understand. No offence intended." "No offence intended," Benedict repeated with the same glacial precision. "How remarkable. You suggest my wife has limited prospects, advancing years and insufficient appeal for gentlemen's taste, but intend no offence. I confess I am curious, Lord Mountjoy, what precisely you would say if offence were your intention." Charlotte felt a rush of cold air as Benedict's words settled on Philip. Benedict was defending her. More than defending, he was methodically destroying Philip's pretensions with the same cold efficiency he applied to business rivals. "My lord, I apologize if I gave offense," Philip stammered, his face now flushed with humiliation. "I merely meant, that is, I did not realize. You did not realize that the woman you rejected in favor of superior dowry would secure establishment vastly exceeding anything you could have provided," Benedict said with conversational casualness that somehow made the words more devastating. "An understandable oversight. One might argue it demonstrates the limitations of your judgment, but then your recent investments suggest that pattern is well established." Several men in their immediate vicinity turned away, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Charlotte recognized Lord Hartwell and the Earl of Somerton, both known to be part of Benedict's circle of business associates. "My investments are sound," Philip said defensively, pride overcoming sense. "Indeed?" Benedict's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I was not aware that partnerships with Edgar Winthrop were considered sound investment strategy. Though I suppose when one's father-in-law loses £23,000 on failed mining speculation, one must maintain public confidence. Tell me, Lord Mountjoy, has Winthrop yet disclosed the full extent of the South American disaster? Or are you still operating under the impression that your wife's dowry remains intact?" The colour drained from Philip's face so rapidly, Charlotte thought he might actually faint. Lady Mountjoy let out a small strangled sound that might have been either shock or confirmation. Benedict turned his attention to Charlotte, his hand at her waist tightening fractionally in what might have been reassurance or possession or both. "My dear," he said, his tone warming by perhaps 1 degree when addressing her, "I believe the quadrille is forming. If you would grant me the honour?" Her voice barely a whisper. "Of course," Charlotte managed, her voice emerging more steadily than she felt. As Benedict guided her away from the carnage of Philip's demolished pretensions, Charlotte heard whispers exploding like fireworks around them. By morning, all of London would know that the Marquess of Stratford had publicly eviscerated Lord Mountjoy for insulting his wife. By afternoon, every detail of Philip's financial entanglements would be common knowledge. The man was socially destroyed, and Benedict had accomplished it in less than 5 minutes with nothing but cold precision and carefully deployed information. "You did not need to do that," Charlotte said quietly as they took their positions for the quadrille. She felt profound relief that her hands were trembling slightly, whether from anger, relief, or something more complicated she could not determine. "On the contrary," Benedict replied, his grey eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "I needed to do precisely that. You are my wife. An insult to you is an insult to me. I do not tolerate insults." "Is that the only reason?" The question escaped before Charlotte could prevent it. Something flickered across Benedict's austere features, gone too quickly to identify. "Does it matter?" he asked quietly. "The result is the same." The music began before Charlotte could formulate a response. They moved through the dance with the same synchronized precision that had characterized their earlier waltz, but now Charlotte found herself intensely aware of every point where their hands touched, every moment when the figures brought them close enough for her to see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, to notice the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when she smiled at something Lord Hartwell said during a brief partner exchange. When the dance concluded, Benedict did not immediately release her hand. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured, "Are you well?" That confrontation was distressing. "If you wish to depart, we shall leave without loss of dignity." "I am well," Charlotte assured him, surprised by how true it was. "Better than well." "Is it terribly petty that I enjoyed watching Philip's face?" "If enjoying justice is petty, then we are both guilty," Benedict replied, and unless Charlotte was mistaken, there was genuine amusement in his voice. "Come, the Duchess is beckoning. No doubt she wishes to glean every detail for her own purposes." The period of a week passed, bringing gradual but unforeseen shifts in their relationship. Benedict began joining Charlotte for breakfast, rather than disappearing immediately to his study. He inquired about her plans for the day, asked her opinions on various matters beyond mere investments, and generally demonstrated increased interest in her activities. When she mentioned wanting to visit the British Museum to view their collection of Greek antiquities, he not only encouraged the expedition, but insisted on accompanying her, spending 3 hours examining pottery and sculptures with every appearance of genuine interest rather than obligatory husbandly indulgence. "You have excellent eye for artistic merit," he observed as they studied a particularly fine example of red figure vase painting. "Do you draw or paint?" "I used to sketch," Charlotte admitted, "but supplies were expensive, and I discontinued the practice when my father's circumstances declined." The next day, a complete set of artist's materials appeared in her sitting room: papers of various weights, charcoals, colored chalks, paints, and brushes of professional quality. The accompanying note read simply, "Thought you might resume the practice. B." Charlotte stared at the gift for a long moment, something warm and bright expanding in her chest. This was not practical necessity. This was thoughtfulness, attention to her unexpressed desires, care manifested in material form. She sought him out in his study that afternoon, finding him bent over correspondence with his usual focused intensity. "Benedict," she said from the doorway. He looked up, setting aside his pen with attention that felt increasingly less like courtesy and more like genuine interest. "Charlotte, is something amiss?" "No," she assured him quickly. Quite the opposite. I wanted to thank you for the artist's supplies. They are extraordinarily generous. They bring you pleasure, he asked, something that might have been satisfaction warming his expression. Immense pleasure, she confirmed. Then the expense is justified, he said simply. I find that your happiness has become important to me. An unexpected development, but not unwelcome. Charlotte moved further into the room, emboldened by his words. May I ask you something? Of course. When you proposed marriage, you said you did not want a wife who would expect romantic declarations, but you have been thoughtful, kind even. Is that merely good household management, or is it something more? Benedict was silent for a long moment, his grey eyes searching her face with uncomfortable intensity. I am not skilled at emotional expression, he said finally. My father raised me to value logic over sentiment, efficiency over affection. When I told you I wanted a practical arrangement, I believed that was the sum of what I could offer. He rose from his desk, moving to stand before the window overlooking the garden. But I am discovering, he continued quietly, that logic and sentiment are not mutually exclusive, that one can appreciate a person's intellectual capacity while also finding pleasure in their company, that providing for someone's happiness can be both practical investment and genuine care. He turned to face her directly. I bring you books because I enjoy seeing your face when you discover a new idea. I consult you on investments because your insights are valuable, yes, but also because I find our discussions stimulating in ways that have nothing to do with financial return. I defended you at the ball, not merely because insults to my wife reflect poorly on me, but because hearing Mountjoy mock you made me want to cause him actual physical harm. Charlotte's breath caught. That sounds rather like affection, she managed. Does it? Benedict asked, something vulnerable entering his expression. I confess I lack the expertise to identify it with certainty. My experience with affection is limited. Charlotte crossed the distance between them with sudden decision, stopping close enough to see the fine detail of his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. Then perhaps, her voice soft with renewed courage, we might learn together. I too am unpracticed in affection, thanks to previous betrayal, but I find that I enjoy our partnership. I value your opinion, respect your intelligence, and appreciate your unexpected kindness. And when you defended me against Philip, I felt something I had not expected to feel again. The possibility that I might trust someone with more than practical matters. Benedict's hand rose to cup her cheek with surprising gentleness, his thumb brushing across her skin in a gesture that felt more intimate than any words. The hand that managed empires proved surprisingly delicate. I do not make promises I cannot keep, he said quietly. I cannot promise passionate declarations or romantic gestures, but I can promise honesty, respect, and commitment to your well-being. If that is sufficient foundation, perhaps we might build something more substantial than mere practical arrangement. I believe, Charlotte replied, her heart racing with hope and fear in equal measure. That might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, because it is true. Benedict's austere features softened into something approaching a smile. Then, with careful deliberation that gave Charlotte ample opportunity to withdraw if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like the perfunctory kiss at their wedding. This was warm, questioning, seeking connection rather than merely fulfilling obligation. Charlotte's hands rose to his shoulders, steadying herself as the world tilted and reformed around this new reality. Her husband, her intellectual partner, kissing her as though she mattered, as though he wanted her, as though this marriage might become something neither of them had anticipated. Their bodies moved with the same careful synchronicity as their minds. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Benedict rested his forehead against hers. I believe, he murmured, that I may be developing feelings that exceed the boundaries of practical partnership. It is disconcerting, but not unwelcome. Charlotte laughed, the sound emerging more freely than it had in years. Benedict watched her, a slow satisfaction replacing his usual sternness. Disconcerting, but not unwelcome. I shall have that engraved on my heart. Mock me if you must, he replied, but there was warmth in his voice that had not been present in their early interactions. I am attempting to navigate unfamiliar territory with limited navigation tools." "Then we shall navigate together," Charlotte promised. "I believe that is what partners do." The weeks that followed brought gradual yet unforeseen shifts in their relationship. Benedict began spending evenings in Charlotte's sitting room rather than isolating himself in his study, reading companionably while she sketched or wrote letters. They attended social events together, and Charlotte noticed the way his hand at her waist had become more possessive, more protective, the way he steered her away from tedious conversations with increasingly adept social navigation. More significantly, they talked about everything and nothing: investments and poetry, mathematics and music, childhood experiences and future hopes. Benedict revealed unexpected depths, sharing stories of his mother's death when he was 12, his father's subsequent unyielding distance, the loneliness of being raised to value logic above all else. "I think," he said one evening as they sat before the fire in her sitting room, "that my father damaged me rather thoroughly. He genuinely believed that emotions were weakness, that affection was liability. He raised me to be impervious to such vulnerabilities." "But you are not impervious," Charlotte observed gently. "You simply learned to hide what you felt." "Perhaps," Benedict acknowledged, "or perhaps I never developed the capacity until I married a woman who made me want to try." Charlotte set aside her book, giving him her full attention. "Is that what I am doing? Making you want to try?" "That is precisely what you are doing," he confirmed. "It is uncomfortable and inefficient, and I find myself thinking about you at inconvenient moments. Quite vexing, really." "Poor Benedict," Charlotte teased. "Burdened with inconvenient thoughts about your own wife. However will you manage?" He pulled her against him with uncharacteristic spontaneity, his arms wrapping around her with surprising strength. "I shall manage," he murmured against her hair, "by accepting that some inefficiencies are worth tolerating. You, Charlotte, are worth considerable inefficiency." It was during these quiet evenings that Charlotte felt their marriage transforming from practical partnership into something far more precious. Benedict might never be demonstrative in public, might never write poetry or make grand romantic gestures. But in private, he was learning to be gentle, affectionate, vulnerable in ways that Charlotte suspected few people ever witnessed. 3 months into their marriage, Benedict appeared in her sitting room one evening with an expression of unusual uncertainty. "I have something to discuss," he said, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident bearing. Charlotte set aside her sketch immediately. "What is it?" "I have been considering the matter of marital relations," he said with characteristic directness. "When we married, I assured you there would be no expectations in that regard. However, circumstances have changed. My feelings have changed." He paused, visibly gathering courage. "I find that I desire you, Charlotte, not merely as intellectual partner or household manager, but as a wife in the fullest sense. However, I will not press the matter if you do not reciprocate such feelings. Your comfort and consent are paramount." Charlotte's heart hammered with mingled nervousness and anticipation. The connecting door between their chambers had remained locked since their wedding night, both of them respecting the boundaries they had established. But those boundaries no longer reflected the reality of their relationship. "I reciprocate," she said quietly. "I find that I desire you as well, not merely out of obligation, but because I have developed considerable affection for you. You have become profoundly cherished, Benedict." His expression transformed, tension releasing into something approaching joy. "Truly?" "Truly," Charlotte confirmed. "You defended me, respected me, gave me intellectual partnership and unexpected gentleness. How could I not develop feelings?" Benedict crossed to her with purpose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I do not know the proper words," he said roughly. "I am not practiced in declarations, but I believe, based on all available evidence, I love you, Charlotte. The emotion is unfamiliar, but I can determine no alternative conclusion for this overwhelming need to ensure your happiness, to be near you, to know your thoughts and hear your laughter." Charlotte felt tears prickling behind her eyes. That was rather eloquent for a man unpracticed in declarations. "Desperation apparently improves my vocabulary," he replied. then kissed her with considerably more passion than their previous chaste exchanges. That night, Charlotte unlocked the connecting door between their chambers. Benedict came to her with careful consideration, taking time to ensure her comfort, demonstrating the same thoughtful attention to her needs that characterized all his interactions with her. Their physical union was tender and awkward and wonderful, the final barrier between them dissolving as they discovered this new dimension of their partnership. Afterward, lying in Benedict's arms with her head on his chest, Charlotte reflected on the extraordinary journey from that cold proposal in the Duchess's library to this moment of genuine intimacy. "I was so certain I would never trust anyone again," she admitted quietly. "Philip taught me that romantic declarations were meaningless, but you taught me that actions speak louder than words, that genuine care manifests in consistency rather than grand gestures." Benedict's arms tightened around her. "I was so certain I was incapable of love," he replied. "My father would be horrified to know I have become so thoroughly compromised by emotion, yet I find I do not care. You are worth the compromise." "We are quite the pair," Charlotte laughed softly. "Two damaged people who married for practical reasons and accidentally found what we had stopped believing existed." "Not accidental," Benedict corrected. "Inevitable. We are suited, Charlotte, in ways that exceed mere intellectual compatibility. We understand each other's wounds, respect each other's strengths, and apparently, against all rational expectation, we love each other." Charlotte lifted her head to look at him. "Say that again." "Which part?" "The part where you love me." Benedict smiled, the expression transforming his usually austere features into something approaching boyish charm. "I love you, Charlotte Vivienne Kingsley, Marchioness of Stratford. I love your intelligence, your resilience, your unexpected humor, and your capacity for forgiveness. I love the way you wrinkle your nose when concentrating on mathematical problems. I love your terrible singing voice and your excellent Latin and the way you argue with me about investments. I love everything about you, which is entirely impractical and profoundly inconvenient and absolutely wonderful." Charlotte kissed him, pouring into the gesture all the affection and gratitude and hope that his words had kindled in her heart. "I love you too," she said against his lips. "My cold, logical, secretly romantic husband who brings me books and destroys my enemies and makes me believe in happiness again." They remained thus for a long time, talking and touching and discovering the joy of physical intimacy combined with genuine emotional connection. It was, Charlotte thought hazily, as sleep finally claimed her, the opposite of her experience with Philip. Where that had been all romantic words and hollow promises, this was solid actions and genuine care wrapped in awkward honesty. She had married for security and found love. She had accepted practical arrangement and discovered true partnership. It was more than she had dreamed possible when she stood in that ballroom 2 years ago, watching Philip choose wealth over affection. The season continued with Charlotte increasingly established as one of society's most respected hostesses. Her intelligence, which Philip had suggested was liability, became asset as she managed Benedict's social obligations with strategic brilliance and hosted dinners where genuine conversation flourished alongside political maneuvering. Philip Mountjoy, meanwhile, had effectively disappeared from fashionable society. The revelation of his father-in-law's financial disasters, combined with Benedict's clinical destruction of his pretensions, had relegated him to social obscurity. Charlotte occasionally saw him at larger events, always hovering at the periphery, his wife looking increasingly unhappy beside him. She found she felt neither triumph nor bitterness when confronting this evidence of his fall. Rather, she felt profound gratitude that his rejection had freed her to find something infinitely better than what he could have offered. 5 years after their marriage, Charlotte stood in the drawing room of Stratford Manor in Gloucestershire, watching her husband play with their 3 children in the garden visible through the tall windows. Benedict had transformed from cold, efficient machine into devoted father, who somehow managed to maintain his business empire while also building elaborate toy castles and telling stories about Greek heroes to enthralled young listeners. Their eldest daughter, Catherine, had inherited Benedict's mathematical aptitude and Charlotte's stubborn independence. Their middle child, Thomas, showed early promise as natural diplomat who could charm anyone. Their youngest, Elizabeth, was still more interested in destroying her siblings' constructions than building her own, but her laughter was sunshine made audible. Charlotte had established her own philanthropic foundation, using Benedict's resources to fund education for girls from impoverished backgrounds. She had published several mathematical papers under her own name, no more masculine pseudonyms, and corresponded with scholars across Europe. She had, in short, built a life that combined intellectual fulfillment with domestic happiness in ways she had never imagined possible during those bleak years after Philip's betrayal. A carriage appeared on the drive, and Charlotte recognized the Earl of Somerton's crest. Benedict had invited several business associates for a house party, continuing his practice of mixing pleasure with strategic relationship building. As the guests assembled for dinner that evening, Charlotte noticed Philip among the company. He had apparently managed some financial recovery and remained tenuously connected to Benedict's wider social circle. He looked older, harder, distinctly unhappy beside his wife, who had devolved from vapid prettiness into sharp-edged bitterness. During dinner, Charlotte found herself seated across from Philip by some trick of placement. He avoided her eyes throughout the meal, clearly uncomfortable with the radical reversal of their circumstances. It was during the ladies' withdrawal to the drawing room that Lady Mountjoy approached Charlotte with calculation barely concealed behind polite smile. "Lady Stratford," she said with forced warmth, "what a lovely home you have. So fortunate for you that you secured such an advantageous match after that dreadful business years ago." Charlotte regarded her with cool assessment. "I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate," she agreed pleasantly, "though not merely for financial advantages. I have a husband I respect and love, children who bring daily joy, and intellectual pursuits that satisfy my curiosity. I suspect that is worth more than any dowry." Lady Mountjoy's expression tightened. "Yes, well, some of us married for love as well." "Did you?" Charlotte asked with genuine curiosity. "I was under the impression your marriage was arranged to combine your father's industrial fortune with Lord Mountjoy's aristocratic connections. Has that proven satisfactory?" The barb landed with precision. Lady Mountjoy's face flushed with anger before she retreated with barely muttered excuse. Later that evening, after the guests had retired, Charlotte found Benedict in the library nursing brandy before the fire. "You seated Philip near me deliberately," she accused without heat. "I did," he admitted without shame. "I wanted him to see what he lost. I wanted him to understand precisely how catastrophically he miscalculated when he chose £40,000 over you." Charlotte settled beside him, accepting the glass of wine he poured. "That is remarkably petty of you." "I never claimed to be above pettiness where you are concerned," Benedict replied. "The man insulted you, rejected you, attempted to humiliate you years later. Allowing him to witness your happiness is mild revenge compared to what my less civilized impulses suggest." Charlotte laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "My fierce protector, still defending me after 5 years of marriage." "Always," he said simply, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You are mine, Charlotte. I do not share well, and I hold grudges with remarkable persistence. Mountjoy rejected you, which makes him fool. He mocked you, which makes him enemy. That he must now observe your success while trapped in his own miserable circumstances brings me considerable satisfaction." "You are terrible," Charlotte informed him affectionately. "I am terrible," he agreed without remorse. "But I am terrible in your service, which makes it acceptable." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching flames dance in the hearth. 5 years of marriage had taught them that sometimes the best communication required no words at all. "Do you ever regret it?" Benedict asked quietly. "Marrying me for practical reasons rather than romantic love?" Charlotte turned to look at him fully, seeing the vulnerability still lurking beneath his confident exterior. "Not for a moment," she said firmly. "I regret Philip's cruelty, but I am grateful for it as well. It led me to you. It taught me that romantic declarations without substance are worthless, while practical partnership with genuine care is priceless." She cupped his face in her hands, making certain he heard every word. "You brought me books and defended my honor and asked my opinions and made me feel valued for the first time in my life. You gave me children and intellectual partnership, and a love built on respect rather than empty promises. How could I possibly regret finding all of that? Benedict pulled her into his lap, holding her close in the kind of gesture that would have been unthinkable during their early marriage. "I love you," he said against her hair. "Those 3 words that I once considered meaningless, I now understand are the most important sentence in any language. I love you, Charlotte. Thank you for teaching me how." "I love you too," Charlotte replied, her heart full of gratitude and contentment. "Thank you for being patient while I learned to trust again. Thank you for showing me that love can be both practical and profound." They remained thus until the fire burned low and exhaustion claimed them. 2 people who had married for logical reasons and discovered that logic and love were not mutually exclusive after all. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Charlotte watched from her bedroom window as Benedict organized an elaborate treasure hunt for the children, his usual severe efficiency transformed into playful creativity. Catherine dashed about with map in hand, while Thomas attempted diplomatic negotiation with his father over clues, and Elizabeth simply ran in circles, laughing. A knock at the door brought her lady's maid with morning chocolate and news that the Duchess of Richmond had arrived unexpectedly, requesting audience with Lady Stratford. Charlotte dressed quickly and descended to find the Duchess ensconced in the drawing room, looking around with evident approval at the comfortable elegance Charlotte had created. "Your Grace," Charlotte greeted with genuine warmth. "What an unexpected pleasure. I had not known you planned to visit Gloucestershire." "I did not," the Duchess admitted with conspiratorial smile, "but I heard through my sources that young Mountjoy was among your house-party guests, and I could not resist witnessing the spectacle. Tell me, has he been appropriately humbled by the sight of your extraordinary success?" Charlotte laughed. "Your Grace delights in schadenfreude. At my age, my dear, one takes delight where one finds it," the Duchess replied without shame. "And there is particular satisfaction in watching a foolish young man reap consequences of his poor judgment. He rejected you for money and now has neither happiness nor security, while you have both in abundance. It is almost poetic." "You are terrible," Charlotte informed her. "I am a duchess," came the amused reply. "I am permitted to be terrible. Besides, I have particular fondness for you, child. When Benedict first told me he intended to propose, I warned him that intelligence in a wife would either be his fortune or his ruin. I am pleased to see it was the former." "Did he truly consult you?" Charlotte asked with surprise. "Of course. Benedict may project absolute self-sufficiency, but he is wise enough to seek counsel when navigating unfamiliar territory. He wanted a wife who would not bore him, who could match his intellect and manage his household with capability. I suggested he consider you, actually." Charlotte stared at the older woman in shock. "You suggested me?" "I did," the Duchess confirmed. "I had observed you at various events, noted your intelligence and dignity despite your circumstances. When Benedict expressed his requirements, you immediately came to mind. I merely planted the seed. He conducted his own research and reached his own conclusions, but the initial suggestion was mine." "I never knew," Charlotte breathed. "Why would you?" The Duchess smiled. "It matters not who made the introduction, only that the match proved successful. And it has, remarkably so. You have given him children, managed his social obligations brilliantly, and unless I am much mistaken, taught him how to love. That is no small accomplishment with a man raised to consider emotion a liability." Charlotte felt unexpected tears prickling behind her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for whatever role you played in bringing us together. I am happier than I ever imagined possible." "As you should be," the Duchess replied briskly. "Now shall we take tea in the garden? I should like to meet these remarkable children I have heard so much about, and perhaps observe Mountjoy's expression when he sees you presiding over your domain like the queen you have become." They did precisely that, spending a delightful afternoon in the sunshine while Charlotte's children charmed the Duchess with their antics, and Benedict demonstrated unexpected talent for hosting. Philip remained notably silent throughout, his discomfort palpable, as he witnessed the warmth and genuine affection that characterized the Stratford household. When the house party concluded 3 days later, Charlotte stood beside Benedict, waving farewell to their departing guests. Philip's carriage was among the last to leave, Lady Mountjoy's pinched expression visible through the window. "I believe," Benedict observed as the final vehicle disappeared down the drive, "that particular experiment in social torture was highly successful." Mountjoy looked absolutely wretched throughout his entire visit. "You are incorrigible," Charlotte informed him. "I am protective," he corrected. "There is a distinction. Also, I enjoy ensuring that those who wronged you understand the magnitude of their mistake. It is one of my few indulgences." Charlotte turned to face him fully, struck again by how much this severe logical man had changed over 5 years of marriage. He smiled more now, laughed with their children, demonstrated affection with increasing comfort. Yet beneath the softer exterior remained the same fierce intelligence and protective intensity that had defended her against Philip's mockery that night at the Duchess's ball. "I love you," she said simply, "not despite your protective nature, but because of it. You make me feel valued and safe and cherished. Thank you for that." Benedict pulled her close, heedless of any servants who might observe. "I love you," he replied. "Thank you for teaching me that love and logic need not be enemies, that practical partnership can evolve into profound connection. You transformed me, Charlotte. You made me better than I was." "We transformed each other," Charlotte corrected. "We built something neither of us expected from the ruins of our separate disappointments. That is rather extraordinary." "It is," Benedict agreed. "Now come. I believe our eldest daughter has questions about Greek mythology that require answering, and our son appears to have convinced the cook to allow him kitchen access, which cannot end well. The duties of parenthood call." They walked back toward the house hand in hand, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Behind them, the Gloucestershire countryside stretched in peaceful prosperity. Ahead, 3 children and a lifetime of partnership awaited. Charlotte reflected that she had entered marriage expecting nothing beyond security and intellectual companionship. She had found instead a partner who valued her mind, protected her dignity, loved her with increasing skill, and gave her family and purpose and joy beyond measure. Philip Mountjoy had taught her that romantic declarations meant nothing without substance. Benedict Kingsley had taught her that substance without romantic declarations was itself the deepest form of love. And in teaching each other how to love honestly, practically, profoundly, they had built something that would endure long after society's gossip faded and titles passed to the next generation. They had built a marriage worth having, a partnership worth cherishing, and a love worth celebrating every single day. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope.